Good evening, everybody. It's Monday night. It's kind of weird that it's Monday night, but it's Monday night, and you're seeing Chris, and you're seeing to my virtual left, Rick. And you're probably thinking, oh my God, they moved Talking TSR to another night. But no, they did not.
Mm-mm.
And
Nope.
I'm gonna get it wrong. Magic Cone. It's not Magic Cone, it's the magic one. Uh Baba, Bobo, Bubo. The dude from MST, the magic one. I hear I get brownie points for that. No, this is not a monster mash. This is spreadsheets. This is
Nope.
charts. This is graphs. This is everything.
Yeah.
My name is Chris Doyle. I am the 5e developer for Goodman Games, and mostly as we're going to see in a moment, mostly responsible for 500 of these monsters. And to my virtual left, as always, my co-host is Rick. Rick, say hi to everybody.
Hi, Chris. Glad to join you on a Monday night.
Yes, on a Monday night. This is a very busy streaming week for me, so I hope
Mhm.
you guys want to see my ugly face because you're going to see it a lot. This is a very, very special show. We are going to dump. We're going to dive into. We're going to dump at some point, probably into these things too. But we're going to dive into the analytics of Dungeon Denizens. But before that, I do have a few announcements that I would like to make. So a live real-time update, and I'm not going to be able to give you a real-time update of Kickstarter because it closed out of my window. So I apologize for that. But we are just a couple of dozen backers away from our most backed Kickstarter ever in Goodman Games history. I mean, I think we're like 18 away or 20 something away.
Nice.
So everybody keep backing away. We love it. That's awesome. We have started earlier today our first poll. If you don't feel confident enough to submit your own monster during the end at the end of the Kickstarter, you can participate in some polls that are going to go on for most of this week. And we're going to all design a monster together. And let me tell you, it is a really, really tight race. I'm talking within 2 votes, the last I checked, between what type of monster we're going to be creating.
Mm.
So every vote really counts. So vote away on that. So couple of more shows that we got coming up for you. Thursday night, Monster Mash, 8 p.m. You're gonna see yours truly, Rick, is gonna be there, and a couple of other familiar faces.
Yep.
If you're familiar with the Goodman Gang, so we're gonna just literally talk monsters and have a good time. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that 20 Sides to Every Story is running yet another playthrough on Friday night. I believe it's 8 p.m. Eastern time because I think it's 7 p.m. Central time. I think they're in a different time zone as us. And they're going to be doing the DCC playthrough of one of the two-page delves. So make sure everybody checks that out. Um, that's it. That's my bookkeeping for this. Rick, how are you doing, sir?
I am doing well, and I'm always happy to talk about monsters. Every night is a
Yes.
good Monday night, Sunday night, doesn't matter. I'm always happy to talk about monsters. One of my favorite topics, as you know. So
Yes.
I'm
And we're going
psyched
to
to
talk
jump
about
into these
monsters
numbers.
again on
Yep.
Thursday, and we're going to talk about monsters on Sunday.
Yep.
Sunday's going to be a little different show, folks.
Yeah.
Regular Talking TSR is going to be a little bit different. There will be a top 5 or top 10 list in there, but it's going to be a little off the wall. We're not going to talk classic adventures. We're going to talk monsters. So,
Yeah. It's going to be
um,
a cool show, though, folks. So
yes.
absolutely
So
join us.
definitely check it out. Yes, 20 Sides Every Story is in the chat. Yay. 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for their playthrough on Friday night. So let's get right to it. People seem pretty excited about slide decks and PowerPoints. I get to actually pretend like I'm a scientist again and actually show off data. So this is exciting. So Elena, can you cue up the very first graph/chart that we have for the night? Thank you. This is kind of an interesting one. I just kind of wanted to show this. This is definitely the biggest project Goodman Games has ever worked on, as far as all the different people from all the different what's called walks of life
Mhm.
that are working on this. And you can see this graph here kind of shows the number of developers, the number of writers. So I do need to preface the number of writers. The number of writers right now is at 27. So that is the 5e writers on this project. So the way we did this book, we actually we actually wrote it in 5e first, and then we converted it to DCC afterwards. So then if you go to the right of that 27, you'll see 9. So there was a team of 9 folks that were actually handling all the DCC conversions. So that was kind of cool. We had 6 editors work on this project, and with that, it comes a lot of lead editing and a lot of teamwork and trying to make sure everybody's kind of going the right way. Not on that list is the amazing Tim Wadzinski, who was actually part of the project, kind of overseeing and kind of helping out the newer editors. So I didn't actually grab him in here, but we should probably give him a special thanks, I think, in the as we move along.
Tim's
Uh
so good.
Yes, yes. 15 artists, including 3 cover artists. Um, Backer designers. So I put that number at 20 because we are probably 70 or so backers away from getting all 20 of the backer created slots filled. So I went to 20 on that. And then the last thing I want to mention is playtesters. Playtesters is at 26 right now. But that number is going to be growing. I have not gotten playtester lists from everybody yet. So that number is probably going to grow probably like 50 or something before the end of the day. So does anything jump out to you, Rick? What are you seeing in the numbers? Let's go inside the
Yeah.
numbers a
All
little
right,
bit,
let's
break it
dig
down.
into the numbers. I have to be honest, it may not be what people would imagine. The first thing that jumps out at me, just kind of coming from a publishing background, is the incredible amount of editors that are involved in this. I guess artists could be expected, and that's still a crazy amount of art going in here from all different people. And
500 pieces from what I hear.
yeah, and what a variety with that many artists. But just to have 6 editors, and then you could say an oversee editor in Tim, who's, again, props that I've worked with Tim and he's so good. To have that many editors churning away at this just hopefully conveys the monumental task that this is. And I can tell folks, seeing a little bit behind the curtain, what a big production this has been. We know this has been long in the coming, but there's so much work. And I think when you see it broken down like this with the contributors, it conveys a little better just how many people are working behind the scenes. But that's what jumped out at me, aside just the crazy amount of artists, editors, and writers all working together, and then you developers kind of holding it all together. It's a lot, folks. It's there's a reason monster books don't get done overnight, and you're looking at it, and this book is being really, so much care is being put into it. So yeah, that's what amazes me when I see this, is just so many editors. I'm used to 1 editor on project, not 6.
Yeah, well, we didn't want to like kill
So
any editors during the making of this book,
right,
so we
exactly.
we talked about it. We talked about it at length. So our main lead editor on the 5e side was Ben. And if folks aren't aware, that Ben just kicked off a brand new Twitch show yesterday on our channel, so you'll be seeing a lot more of Ben. But yeah, he was kind of the one. He wrangled the spreadsheet, especially in the early days, and set the foundation for the spreadsheet. We've taken the spreadsheet to different places since then, but he was the one that was kind of overseeing, and we used a Discord channel so that everybody could talk together at the same time. So we did a whole bunch of kind of things where I'd never used the Discord channel before to use it as a means of communication. So it was a fair amount of learning on the fly and kind of getting out of our comfort zone, definitely, and working with such a huge group of people. And I said it once, I know I've said it before, is that I don't think we could have done a project like this without me being on board full time
Mhm.
at Goodman Games, because there's just a lot of people. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen,
Yeah,
and keeping everybody moving in the right direction is
Mhm.
definitely can be a challenge at times.
Yeah.
So, all
It's
right.
it's it's hard, but yeah, that's amazing.
Okay, so the next chart's going to blow people's minds. So if we can pull up chart number 2, this is the authors and the number of monsters that they have done per author. And this is quite possibly the ugliest pie chart I have ever created in my entire career. And I've created quite a bit of them. So what you're seeing there is all those slices of the pie are a different author. So there's all 27 are captured in there. We have their initials in there. So this could also be kind of this is kind of like the game inside the game thing, try and figure out whose initials are whose.
Guess the initials,
Um,
folks.
and you can see how that, and those numbers that are after the initials, those are the number of monsters that each of them did. So I think there's two pretty glaring ones that kind of jump out there. But
I
what do you see in this graph, Rick?
yeah,
What kind of strikes you there?
well, this butterfly's got two real big wings, which is as it should be. For it to achieve flight, you need the twin directors of both 5e and the DCC RPG kind of, holding down the fort there. So you and Mike Curtis are very well represented there, I see. I didn't realize it was quite that high a number, so I'm sure you're monstered out, but that's 180. Holy smoke.
Yes, and that counts converting monsters and creating monsters. So
Hmm.
it's a little bit of both there. And I just out of curiosity, I actually threw some percentages in on my notes and everything. So
Hmm.
Mr. Curtis did 29.7% of the monsters in the book. I have done 32.5%. And do you see who's in third place? Whose
Yes.
initials are in third place
I,
there?
I
Anybody have a
sus
guess in the chat?
Any guesses? Guesses?
Yeah, guesses on possibly who could be the third. Yeah, yeah, gotta jump in there and do some hard math. Well, we get to that.
Right.
I do want to preface. I probably should have said this earlier. So, all of these charts are created where I'm kind of assuming that all of the stretch goals are being hit. So, so if you guys are actually like crunching, taking screenshots and actually crunching the numbers, those numbers are based off of a pretty a bit higher of a number than like 500. So Rodney Matthews, close, very close. Rodney Matthews is not the answer.
That Rodney, he's
Yeah,
he's a
Rodney,
really
he did a lot, but he didn't want to go by the name of Rodney. So
that's
number three is yours truly, to my virtual left. Rick
yeah.
is coming in at, you did 5.1% of the
Very
monsters in this book. So if you roll a die 20 every time you look at a monster, if you roll 20, you did it.
See,
So
or if you roll a one, depending on how you
yeah.
look at it.
So you used to put it that way. When you first of all you say, "Well, I did
Yeah.
28 monsters." That sounds like a lot. And then when you say I did 5% of the monsters, doesn't sound like a lot,
It
does it?
it looked like a lot until I see those two mammoth slices there, and then but I'm proud of my little green slice, mind you.
Yeah,
So
awesome.
I've got the head of the moth or the antenna or something there.
Yes. And what's everybody's favorite type of pie in the chat? I'll tell you my favorite type of pie. It's definitely pumpkin pie. It's not even
Nice.
close. It is not even close. And no, and don't do it. Don't add anything to the pumpkin pie. I don't want no ice cream. I want no nothing to take away from the pumpkin part.
He
I
doesn't want
mean,
any of
it's
that a la carte stuff. Well,
none of that. None of that.
I'm
So
an apple pie man, and I don't like to sully my pie with anything either. I like that just pure unadulterated pie. Thank you very much.
yeah, I mean, I do love me some apple pie. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Making apple pie is very labor intensive. I
Yeah,
mean, doing a pumpkin pie is a lot easier. So
absolutely true. But
for
yeah,
the
so this look that, but that's a very respectable monster pie we have here.
awesome. Okay,
And there are
so
quite a
we're
few. Before
uh,
we move on, do you want to mention
sure.
it? Like we even have a few kind of guest designers in there, and
We do. So first of all, for folks who really like Harley Stroh, and you've heard that name
mhm.
before, he has contributed several monsters to this book, which we're very happy about. We've interviewed him on this channel. Professor Dungeon Master has actually done one of our monsters. Really cool. And there's going to be actually some other interesting news coming out from him later on this
Mm.
year. And also, for those of you folks, we interviewed this fine gentleman as well, Bob Worldbuilder, contributed to a monster as well. And for those of you folks who follow Jordan, the PH is silent, in which I'm going to be on his Saturday morning podcast this week, talking what else? Talking monsters. He actually created a monster for us too. So yeah, so we actually got a lot of people involved in there. And I've said it before on other shows. Having so many people contribute to a book, it just makes the book better.
Mhm.
Because again, the book would get really boring if Mike and I did all the monsters. The fact that you're getting all of these other creators, they all have their own gems to add, their bits or pieces. And as I've talked about on the Monster Mash show, how it inspired some of the editors to actually write some of the monsters because they were like, that's a really cool concept. I want to do
Mhm.
something with that. So So that was really cool. So
Yeah, there's
um
some really cool designs. I have to say, now that I've seen some of the art and some of the designs that the other folks have done, I've been blown away. There's some really cool designs in there.
So cool. All right. So now we're going to go on to the next chart. This was kind of a fun one. I have to admit, this is monsters by letter. So this is yeah, so when you're putting in together a book, and it is kind of interesting to see how this lands at times. And it
Hmm.
was pretty interesting when we first went into this, we were not we didn't even pay attention to this, but we captured this in our spreadsheet, obviously, and we were putting our table of contents together. It became pretty obvious too. But shocking, first of
Yeah.
all, that first all the way to the left, that miscellaneous, that is actually, if you are familiar with the 5e um monster manual, there's that chapter in the back, that appendix in the back, that's got all the beasts and everything and all that.
Mhm.
That's what that miscellaneous is. So we've got 59 monsters that are in that chapter, so that they're not necessarily alphabetical to the other ones.
Mm.
But it was interesting when we put the whole list together to find out that we actually did have a couple of holes and we needed to fill them. Actually, believe it or not, when we got done with our initial like slog of 500 and some odd monsters, there was one letter that was not represented. And I thought that people should probably get a guess on what that is, because I think it might surprise people on what letter that was. I see that Shade of Icarus is saying Z needs more representation. Yeah, okay. It's not that easy coming up with Z names.
Yeah.
Um, the Y one, I believe, was you, Rick, if I'm not mistaken. I think you came up with
Yes.
the Y
Yeah.
monster. Yeah, so nope, so Y is not the answer. So the unofficial letter of evil. Okay. I no, believe it or not, I mean, I was easy to think about ice. I think we have a couple of ice creatures in there and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So yeah,
I don't even know this. I've got my
so
own
Bobo
guess.
got it. Bobo got it. Jay needs
Yeah,
love.
there
Let
we
me
go. I
tell
got
you,
it.
Jay needs
Yeah.
love. We had no Jays at the end
Mhm.
when we were done. So we went on a mission actually, and we reached out to a couple people and specifically asked them to create monsters. And they were like, "I would love to create a monster." And then I said, "There's one stipulation," and they're like, "What?" And I'm like, "It has to begin with the letter J." And then they're like, "Okay." So, but it worked, and we ended up with three. So, I mean, I thought it was really cool. But look at all those G's. I
Yeah,
mean,
I
look at all
clearly
those
just
G's.
proportionate. Now, does that include like if you have giant blank? Is that
No,
then a G?
generally not. There might be a
Okay.
few in there.
Oh
Obviously
wow.
there are giants in there.
Hmm.
But no, most of the giant critters are in the miscellaneous chapter.
Mm.
Most of them. I think there is a couple
Okay.
for a few reasons. There was a few where we were like, well, this guy's kind of well developed and he probably deserves his own entry instead of being
Yeah.
stuffed in the appendix. So yeah, no monster named after Joe Goodman in his honor. No, sorry, Jim Cutter. But the funny part about that though is there is Glorfindel Goodman in Dark Tower, and that was in the original. We didn't change that name, so that's kind of really funny there. So yeah, I know it's silly looking at letters, but and what the monsters begin with what letters, but I don't know. It was an easy chart to
There
actually
you
throw
go. We
together.
give you all the stats, folks.
We
And
do,
and if
we
it's a
do.
book by Goodman Games, there's nothing wrong with G being strongly represented. But
That is true. Yeah, that's a good point. We probably should have made that a selling point.
there
Yeah,
you
probably
go.
should have done that. It's like, we scoured the planet looking for monsters that began with the letter G, but it didn't work out. So, okay, moving on to our next table
Oh, this is
chart. Oh,
probably
we're
my
back to
favorite.
pie. We're back to pumpkin pie. So this
Yeah,
is monsters by type.
love it.
And this one's very colorful, not so much a
Mhm.
butterfly this time.
No.
And so you can see the breakdown. Now I get it, this is monsters by type is a very 5e thing.
Hmm.
But if you've got an ooze or plant, you're going to be able to figure that out in DCC.
Yeah.
So just kind of humor us a little bit on there. Anything jump out to you on this one, Rick?
I first off, I love the fact that we just have a nice cross section of everything. I love those monstrosities. I'm happily surprised that we have as many constructs and undead as we have, because Those are always the creatures I find myself coming back to when I'm DMing. Is a lot of times I'll have a closed up tomb, or I'll just have some environment maybe that's not inducive to natural living creatures, shall we say?
Hmm.
And you can never have too many undead, let's be honest. And even constructs, it's kind of, you think of there being a lot of constructs, but when you actually look at the, kind of canon golems and things, there aren't that many, and there's just so many interesting places to go there. So those two little gray slices there really jumped out at me as a happy surprise. I tend to like the weirder beasties too, so seeing like the monstrosities and the plants like where it is too. The plant is also very high. I'm surprised that we've got 30 set. Now I contributed some of them, so I perhaps pumped up that number a little bit with my own bias. But yeah, what a nice surprise that was. Because one expects humanoids and giants and some things, and 36 dragons. I guess we shouldn't ignore that either.
No, I mean, it's
That's
in the
no
name of the
small
game.
amount of, yeah,
So
that's no small amount of dragons. So now the challenge is to people who get this book is to use those dragons, put them in your game,
exactly, exactly. Yeah, a couple things. I totally agree. Constructs. I'm not surprised that monstrosities, led the pack
Yeah.
without a doubt. And also not surprised that beasts were pretty high too, because
Hmm.
those are fairly common in your typical adventures. But yeah, constructs was a little bit surprising. And you're right. There's so many. I mean, you get 4 golems in the monster manual,
Yeah.
and like you said, there's so many ways, so many places you can go, with constructs, and we've featured a lot of them in previous products, and they are fascinating. There's a lot
Hmm.
of really cool things that you can do with constructs,
Yeah.
and they can really fit that theme. And what you said exactly about a ruin or a
Hmm.
tomb or something sealed where you can't have like beasts coming and going easily or
Hmm.
monstrosities or whatever. It makes sense that constructs and undead would be so well represented. So very pleased with that. The one thing that and we didn't fudge these numbers obviously, but we did after when we reached out and
Hmm.
recruited our 13 freelance contributors. Then their first during our open call in 2020, end of 2020 and beginning of 2021. You know, that was kind of after Mike and I had done the lion's share of the monsters, but we still needed a bunch of monsters. So those 13 writers, when we assigned them, I did kind of tell them, I kind of put in their head, hey, we need dragons, we need
Hmm.
celestials, we need fiends. I think I even said we need giants. Well, I might have said plants because I know I did get a few plants from them. And I said, I can't promise that, we're going to pick those, but I said, but if you give me those and they're compelling, there's a really good chance they're going to make it, as opposed to another monstrosity or another beast and everything. So folks did actually go that direction,
Hmm.
and gave us something. It's funny, and we're going to see this in the next chart. I did the same thing with CR. I asked
Hmm.
for a certain challenge rating or higher,
Hmm.
and I almost got too many. I almost got like too many monsters of too high CR, because we all know we play the game. I mean, those awesome, really high CR monsters are cool, but they don't see the table as often as the
Yeah.
CR5 and below monsters. So, and again, we want these to be as useful as possible. So there is that. But what I was really pleased at when I was putting this chart together was to see we have 8 types of monsters that are between the range of 34 and 44. And I love that. The plants, the undead, the aberrations, dragons, elementals, fae, fiends, and humanoids. All of those types we have between 34 and 44 monsters.
Hmm.
So I like that. I know we got some outliers where the Celestials are really kind of not really
Hmm.
represented and everything, but the fact that we've got a really nice variety
Hmm.
really works, and I'm really really pleased about that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no,
very
it's
much
a
so.
really nice distribute. Even elementals and Fae, that's a higher number than I expected. It's a very balanced like you said, there's some, I think monstrosity is a little bit, it's like beast too. It's so not just a popular category, but sort of catch all a little bit, where you just get a
Hmm.
lot of things kind of fall into that category naturally. But outside of that, it's such a balanced mix of monsters we've got in this book, which is so cool.
Agreed. Totally agree on that. So, all right, we're gonna move on to our next chart, and this is gonna be monsters by challenge
Dum
rating. So I
dum
already kind of
dum.
teased this a little bit about challenge ratings. So we're gonna throw that one up there. Yes, we've getting some love for the low CR monsters and whoop whoop. Not exactly sure what whoop whoop is referring to, but we're gonna go with it there. I'm gonna let you lead this one,
Sure.
Rick. So what jumps out to you when you take a look at this chart?
I love the heavy amount of monsters right around 1 and 2 because I
Hmm.
find that's a high point. Again, in my own experience as DM, I find that you more quickly go by the extremely low CR number, or at least I do. The quarter and halves I use perhaps for a lesser duration, but I find like monsters that are like CR 1 to 3, I'm constantly using them. Even as the characters are leveling up, you find that they play a support role or they come in hordes, and so it extremely useful. And then I'm happy that we've got as many as we have. If you look at that, it's such a nice, healthy representation up to 11, which is a lot. That's 11's a high CR. 11's
Hmm.
that's a fairly challenging, and the fact that we go all the way to 30 is insane. The fact that we actually represent the 20s for those who survive, you know, is great too, because those monsters too are so, like you said, they don't hit the table as much, and yet they're so much more difficult to design. Just the effort in designing a high CR monster is not something to be underestimated. When it's difficult to create, or I find, to create a monster that's higher than like CR 15, and you really have to put effort to make it
Yeah.
be able to challenge the spells and the things that are brought against it. So the fact that we have, some nice healthy representation in that, 20 plus range, I love it.
All
Because
right. There's a lot to unpack here. So we got a bunch
yeah.
of really good questions in the chat. So the first question is from Bobo is what is a zero? Zero is a challenge rating in 5e. It's essentially a non-combatant, if you will.
Mhm.
For example, like a bird or a cat or something, and you're probably like, whoa, why are there like CR zeros? That's useless creatures in there. Well, they're in there primarily for familiars,
Mhm.
and also for druid shaped critters. So and a lot of the times, most of them, again, I apologize for this. I love armadillos, so there's probably an armadillo in there, and there probably doesn't need to be, but there is actually an armadillo themed humanoid. And there are actually giant armadillos in there as well. So it just seemed like I know it's a lot of armadillos, but anyway, uh, but those are actually they actually play a pretty important role because we do have some lycanthropes and shape changers that can actually assume the form of like a normal
Mhm.
animal. So if we did that, we actually put the normal animal in there. So for example, we do have a werefox that is in the book, and we actually statted out both a fox and a giant fox because the werefox can actually assume the shape of both a fox and a werefox and a giant fox, excuse me. So we put those in the book because those don't actually exist in the official rule book. So that's why they're there. So that's kind of the reason we went in that direction there. Now, yes, is the CR monster a dragon? Tim L. White is asking. The short answer to that is no. It is not a dragon. There are several dragons that are up into the 20s, though, I will admit.
Mhm.
Um, and if you want to find out a little bit more about the CR30 monster, I would recommend you check us out on Thursday night because the author of the CR30 monster is actually going to talk about it quite a bit.
Mm.
And what's kind of important about that is that was one of the ones where we were like, we got really close when we put the spreadsheet together. We were like, oh wow, if we had a CR27 and if we had a CR23 and if we had a CR30, we could have one of each challenge rating.
Mhm.
Well, if that does not sound like a challenge,
Mhm.
that was a challenge. So we actually did go in and we actually monkey might be the wrong word, King Kong might be a better word. We actually went in and messed with the statistics and actually moved some CRs around so that we would get some really good representation. I'll be honest with you, I think I had to do that for two creatures, maybe three. I honestly can't remember, but outside of that, a lot of what you're seeing in those upper 20s and the mid 20s, if they're not dragons, they're demon lords and fiends, greater fiends. We have quite a few, at least six-ish, I'm thinking, that are actual like demon lords. Several of them familiar to folks of that have been following Goodman games for the last 20 years.
Hmm.
They are, let's just say they're not unfamiliar names, but we did take the time to stat those out. And another interesting thing, and Rick brought it up, is the stat boxes and those entries tend to be much longer than one page. Whenever you start talking a CR
Yeah.
25 Demon Lord, between legendary actions, lair actions, the whole nine yards, you're gonna get a monster pay. It's gonna be two or maybe even 3 pages long. So we've got some too. So even though we said, except for those beasts and everything, we did not give an entire page to the armadillo. But we gave at least a full page to almost all the monsters, and then there's a group of monsters where there's 2 to 3 pages per. So and I see lots of armadillo love in the thing. A thorny bush, I can guarantee there's at least one thorny bush in this book. So yeah, so I just want to answer a bunch of those questions. And I also see Tarask 2.0. It's very interesting you mentioned that. I'm just gonna leave it at that. So any other comments or anything that you see in this chart that you noticed or called to your attention?
And this is strictly me looking at the chart as regard, as aside from being a participant, is just the dip in the number 7 CR. I'm wondering what's going on with the that we have.
I agree.
Isn't
The
that
actually
odd?
7, 8, and 9
Yeah.
is pretty surprising. I think
Yeah.
5 is very common that you'll get a fair amount. Because
Hmm.
5 is kind of like, I don't know, it's just a number that I think people gravitate towards.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're like fairly well represented, and all of a sudden it's like 7, 8, and 9 kind of go down, and it got a little bit of a bump at 10 and 11. And again, I'm guessing that's just because of 10 is like a round number, and
That's
people
what I
like,
was, yeah,
yeah,
looking at 10, that's what I was thinking was 10 was maybe, I'm thinking, well, it is a nice round number, but
yeah.
the
And
analyst in me wants to grab the monster manual and break that down and put one chart next to the other and see,
that's cool. But and we did end up moving the CRs of the monsters around a little bit because we would get something submitted, and that was one of the first tasks that the editorial team looked at, is like, is that, if somebody submitted a
yeah.
CR 10 creature, is it really a 10? And then they went through and crunched the numbers, and they said, well, it's not. So there's two things we can do. We can either beef it up and make it a CR 10, or we can say, well, it's really a CR 9 or it's really a CR 11.
Mhm.
So I'm guessing the bump in 11s is probably exactly that. Somebody created a CR 10, and it ended up being a CR 11 when we were done with it, which cut the CR 10 numbers down a little bit. So, but yeah, going into this, with the exception of those couple of monsters and the CR 30 critter, we didn't actually like fudge these numbers any, or say we wanted this many. That, I mean, I was very pleased to see
Mhm.
a really nice, almost a bell curve-ish kind of thing
Yeah.
going on from CR 0 to 10. I was kind of hoping that we were going to see something like that, and I think it's
Mhm.
pretty expected. CR 16 was another little blip, like why
Yeah.
there's that many CR 16s,
Yeah.
but that was probably just movement of shifting things around in doing it. And 5e can be mathy at times, but
Mhm.
the math doesn't always work
Mhm.
exactly. And CR is one of those things. I've always equated CR to the Pirates Code. It's more like guidelines.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
really like
Definitely
hard and fast. So um,
agree.
cool. All right, moving on. So this one's kind of a silly chart, and I'll be honest, this next chart, this is monsters by primary terrain.
Mhm.
I do want to call out the word primary in there, and I'm going to get to that in a second. So we throw that one up there. So a couple of very interesting things about this chart. First of all, I say primary terrain because all of our monsters have one terrain listed. Um, Many of them have a second terrain listed, and a lot of them are very similar. A lot of them are hills or mountains or coastal and aquatic or something like that. So, or forest and jungle, or so that I didn't break it down into secondary terrain and primary. This is just primary terrain. So
Okay.
When we actually put the book together, and actually put the monsters by terrain in like the back of the book, we're going to capture both the primary and the secondary terrain if they have
Hmm.
them. So these numbers would certainly change based on that. But as you can see, another pretty good spread. What
Yeah.
jumps out to you, Rick, right off the bat?
All right. Well, I'm going to call out three items that are popping out to
Sure,
me. What's that?
sure, go for it.
Yeah. Well, first, high number of planar creatures, extra planar creatures, which is interesting. I mean, that's literally our third highest category, which even being primary is surprising. I mean, yes, you have demons, you have devils, and those high CR critters, but that's still a high number. So that's kind of interesting.
Hmm.
The other two that jumped at me, and they're not necessarily the highest bars, but a delightful surprise, is the aquatic and the urban. Those two are two interesting categories that are, it's nice to see those healthy bars there. Because I always love those aquatic creatures, and I know you do.
Well, that's
And
I was gonna explain. I can explain both of those
oh,
exactly.
okay.
Yeah, so yeah, aquatic is probably my fault. Because that was my previous life. Yes, I love me some aquatic critters. I won't be shy about that.
Yeah.
So that's where that comes from. Urban is very interesting. The hit on the urban critters was that was one of the terrains I actually asked our freelancers to focus on. I was like
Mm.
fiends,
Hmm.
celestials, and then I gave them, I think I said jungle and I
Hmm.
said urban, I think was the two the two terrains that I might have also said planar too, and that's
Hmm.
kind of captured in the celestials. But yeah, so looking at that planar is
Yeah.
really it's fiends, it's celestials, it's elementals.
Okay.
That actually is what kind
Elementals.
of
Okay.
capturing all of those right
Yeah.
there. So yeah, so that explains that exactly. I think I might have asked for swamp too, which is probably about a little
Hmm.
bit of swamp, but this is, I think, a pretty decent spread.
Hmm.
I think again, coastal and aquatic, there's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
carryover back on that, and any is kind of an interesting one in its own part. I mean, that's every monster that kind of doesn't fit in any of the other categories. I think you can trace that right back to our constructs because the
Hmm.
constructs can, you can have a stone golem in the Arctic, you can have it
Yeah.
underwater, you can have it in a jungle, you can have it underground, you can, really, in my opinion, a construct can really kind of be anywhere. I mean,
Hmm.
it's not really limited to what its typical terrain is. I mean, technically, all of these, are not limited. I mean, they could really
Yeah.
occur anywhere, but it's kind of cool to kind of list terrain. And the whole
Oh, yeah.
reason we did this is we want those tables at the back of the book that say,
Hmm.
if you're in
Oh,
the
yeah.
mountains, here's your mountain critters. If you're in the hills, here's your hills critters. If you're in the forest, here's that and everything. Um, but I'm surprised you didn't call out underground. Surprised you did. I mean,
Yeah,
was it too
underground,
obvious?
it's obviously it's we have the great mountain there of underground. I guess it's because in my mind so many things fit well into the underground. It's such a natural sort of, and that too, you can never have too many underground creatures. So I'm happy to see it's that high, but I kind of I guess I expected it would be
Yeah.
fairly high, and I pumped that one up. I think a lot of my critters were either underground or forest critters, so
Hmm.
you can blame me for perhaps inflating those two stacks a bit.
Yeah, well, you look no further than the name of the book,
Hmm.
Dungeon Denizens.
Yeah.
Um, and believe it or not, and this is definitely pulling the curtain back a little bit, in the very, very early stages when we decided we were going to do a monster book, it was going to be all underground and dungeon
Yeah.
dwelling monsters. There was not going to be aquatic, there was not going to be forest, there was not going to be Arctic. And then somewhere along the line, and again, fairly early in the process, but not at
Hmm.
the beginning of the process, when we shifted gears and we were like, what's going to make this book different than any other book? And we said
Hmm.
500. As soon as we went to 500, I kind of raised my hand and I was like, if we're going to do
Right.
500, we kind of need a few more trains to work
Yeah.
from. I'm like, I'm sure we could do all underground critters, but I'm
Hmm.
like, I really wouldn't want to like limit folks to that and everything. And the
Hmm.
last thing you want to do is like limit folks. And when I
Hmm.
presented my preferred terrains and CRs and types to my contributors, I always put it as an option. I was like,
Hmm.
it's not that I'm gonna not take something. If you send me something compelling, I'm gonna use it. But I'm like, But if it's set in a swamp, or if it's
Mhm,
planar, or if it's a celestial, I'm more likely to take it.
mhm.
And that's what that kind of drove people, I think, to probably submit the ones that they did. So and let's see what we had a couple of questions here. No, I was so not a Baywatch dude. I was an aquatic biologist, so I've spent a lot of time around and in and underwater. Yes, hill people are needed. That's a really good one. Banjo music in the hills. You know, there might be a banjo themed monster, but he's not in the hills. So I will throw that out to you. Shutter Mountain's represented, of course. Castle Hammer has a chunk of France. Yeah, it does. Yeah, and magical forest underground. Yeah, totally with that. So yeah,
Yeah,
just take those forest critters and put them in the dungeon. That works too. So love it. Absolutely love it. So
and I love the fact that we're including the environment tables, in the back of this book too, because I still remember, what was it, the Fiend Folio or whatever it was, when
yeah.
they first featured those, and they were just the coolest thing. Because
Uh,
again, I guess every DM works different, but for me, I always think of environment, and I'll think, oh, I want to, make a dungeon in the Arctic or something, or in the desert, and then I start thinking, and frankly, as soon as I go to the environment, my very next thought process is to start thinking of the monsters that are present, and that, what can I use, what's normally living in the desert. And it's hard when you have some of these environments that are not as populated with critters. You don't want to always like bring out the mummies, say, in the desert. So it's
yeah,
it's so nice to like look and say, hey, there's 22 desert creatures in here. So it's just, to me, more material for the DM to be able to go back to those pages in the back, look up, see what critters fit where, and then start thinking about where they can plug them in. It's pure utility, which I love. So
agreed. 100% on that. 100%. So yeah, so that was kind of fun. So we're gonna move on to our next chart. So this is monsters by size. Now, this
mm,
was not in the original plan to have this data available at our fingertips.
hmm
But then it became a necessity as we started getting to the latter stages of the project. So you can see we have, again, what I consider to be a pretty nice, almost bell-like
hmm
curve
yeah,
there, where you got most of your critters being medium and large, really like that, and then a fair amount of huge critters. I'm actually a little bit surprised there's that many huge critters.
hmm
And then small, obviously less of those. And then, we've got the tiny critters represented in, and of course the gargantuans. And the gargantuans, a few of those are specifically gargantuan critters. I happen to like kaiju quite a bit. So we did actually put in a couple of specific like gargantuan beasts. Like I'm a
hmm
big fan of the old monster movies. So there's a gargantuan praying mantis, gargantuan crab, as a nod back to S2. So yeah, so there's a few of those in there that obviously are going to skew those numbers a little bit, but
hmm
but the main reason that I had this data to put this together was when we decided that we were going to offer cardboard pawns for this project. It became necessary to lay out on pages how many cardboard pages we need to actually create a product like this before. It's almost like doing a board game, basically. So in order to do that, I needed to know, well, how many medium creatures do I have? How many small creatures do I have? So that was the first step. So I went through and added all that to our spreadsheet. Like I said, Ben created this spreadsheet. We just took it in completely different directions. Um, and then I took all that data and consolidated all that data and put it in, and then we actually had our numbers, and then I created in the spreadsheet a nifty little calculation table where we can actually change the numbers of things and fiddle around so that we could actually calculate like the minimum number of pages we would do, because shipping and the more cardboard pages you have, the more expensive it is. So I think what we will do in a second here is we're gonna scroll through those templates. I actually included
mm,
those templates. So
cool.
if Elena, if you want to scroll through those, and you don't need to leave them up for as long, you can just kind of go through. If you want to start us off with pawn page A. Pawn page A has got 6 small and 6 huge tokens on it, the outlines there. And then if you want to go to pawn page B, there's a eclectic little selection there. We've got 2 tiny, 5 small, and 12 large. And this is just like playing with like a jigsaw puzzle. This is like
Yeah.
Tetris all over again. I'm a huge board gamer, and polyominoes and
Mhm.
board games is a thing these days. And I'm like, I kind of felt like kind of right where we were at there. You can move to pawn page C now. This is the clearly the most boring one. This was the easiest one to put together. Ha ha ha. It's and you need a lot of medium critters,
Yeah.
obviously, so we needed to get a lot on a page. And mission accomplished there. Pawn page D, that is another eclectic selection. So again, we are doing gargantuan pawns in this book. We're gonna try and do every single monster at least one pawn. The plan is to also have a PDF available so that if you wanted to print out additional ones on cardstock, or even print them out on paper and like paperclip, or use that little sticky stuff that you could actually
Mhm.
put it onto like another pawn of the appropriate size. So again, you're probably not going to get 12 armadillo folk in the pawn collection. You might get 2 or 3, but if you need 10 or 12 of them, and I know I would need 10 or 12 of them,
Yeah.
then you'll have that ability to do the PDF and kind of do that. But we definitely want to give at least one of each monster. And I think the last time I did all the calculations, it's going to be like 38 pages of cardboard stock. It's going to be a stack of cardboard. It's about 3 inches thick, I think. So if you're looking at the price point on that pawn collection, there's a
There you go.
reason
Yes.
why that price point is higher than the book.
That's a lot of
You're
cardboard,
you're getting a lot of
Yeah.
cardboard for that, and
Fantasy
it's
Flight's got nothing on us.
no, not at
So
all. Actually, they might actually be affecting the printer, I think, at some point. But yeah. So, and keep in mind, it's full color on both sides of the cardboard, so that you can see it on both sides. So, and it's a great deal. I know it's a lot of money to buy a pawn set, but you can get a really good
yeah.
discount by getting it on
And
the
these are
on the
good
Kickstarter.
quality pawns too, it should be mentioned.
Oh
These are
yeah,
not little
that's thick.
flimsy things. These are quality, like, board game quality pawns we're talking about.
They
So,
are. They are. So, and again, just ways we prefer to play our games around a game table. So
mhm.
that's why we wanted to make the pawns available. And the last one, I don't know if Elena showed it or yet, but pawn page E, that is 4 gargantuan and 6 medium pawns on there. So that was kind of fun. That was like, there was like one morning I just did that like the entire morning. I was just laying out like boxes and being like, well, how can I fit like more on this page? And I was like, it was a fun process. It was a little daunting in the beginning to get started, but once I got going, they kind of fell into place afterwards in that, and it was really kind of a fun activity to do. So um, cool. So that is all of the charts and the graphs that we have. A little bit of a different show. Any parting shots or more witty banter, Rick?
Um, just, hearkening on that monster size chart, I just want to say, although it follows the bell curve I kind of expected, I love the extremes. I love the fact that we have as many tiny critters and as many gargantuan critters as we do. And I'm a kaiju fan. I grew up on both Godzilla movies and the kind of universal, this spider, whatever it is huge and is walking on the town type movies. So I love it. So, that's what I recommend everybody do. Forget the armadillos, take the gargantuan pawns and
What?
duplicate. Give your party 5, kaiju and see what they do with that. So
What about gargantuan armadillos? I
yeah. Oh
mean,
well,
what's
yeah.
the armor
Then you
class
get
on
the
that?
best of both worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I could have done that. I didn't, but I could have. I
That's an
mean,
idea.
yeah, it's definitely
501.
it's definitely an idea. So, but yeah, so again, we're just having fun, and the way
Yeah.
we have been looking at this project all along is like we're just trying to give folks the most options. Are you going to use all? No one's going to use all 500 monsters in this book. It's
Yeah.
impossible. But by giving all these different options and all these different variety and all that,
Mhm.
I mean, that's the plan here. The plan here is there's hopefully going to be something for everybody, and this has been a great, fascinating project to work on. It's been almost 3 years already.
Amazing.
I've mentioned that before in the past, that folks don't realize how far out we are working
Mhm.
on these projects. in advance. Like people are like, when we announced them for the Kickstarter, it's like we've been working on this for literally years. So it is really cool when we get to this point and then we can finally talk about it so freely. But there's 2 long years where we really haven't said anything about
Yeah,
monsters, except for some shows and dropping some hints here and there. So
it's true,
um,
folks. It's funny. I date all my like Goodman project folders by year. I have year folders and then projects in the and I think my Dungeon Denizens folder is in my 2020 year
yes,
folder.
because I
So
believe that's when I reached out to you to start that.
yeah.
You were one of the
So
early, it was Mike and
so
myself were the early ones, and then you and Bob Brinkman were the next two that we recruited, and then we started bringing in all the other authors. So you guys were kind of in on like the ground floor there,
so
pretty much. So,
that's how
um,
long this pot's been simmering on Chris's stove, folks.
So, so we do have a hard stop at the top of the hour because we have another show coming up. So I want to just answer a couple of questions in the chat here before I do some of that. So what sort of random tables will there be to pick monsters? So on the 5e side, the tables that you're going to get at the back of the book, and we're going to reproduce as many as we can on the inside panels of the jam screen. That's going to be your monsters by CR, your monsters by terrain, and probably not monsters by size. We're probably not going to do that, but monsters by type. Those are the type of things that are going to be in the appendices of the 5e book. Now, the DCC book, you're going to get a little bit about that, but you don't have CRs and you don't have types in Dungeon Denizens. Terrain you can certainly do. So there will be literally tables of like, if you're in the forest and here's what you can run into, and it's just basically going to be like a random table of generating different things. So it's going to be really, really interesting in that regard as far as what the DCC gang is going to do. Plus, they have a bunch of really other cool ideas on how to make the monsters really feel like DCC monsters. So that's gonna be great. So, what monster was the most odd monster? I don't think I
That's
could
hard.
pick just one.
Yeah, that's
There are
really
a
hard.
lot.
Yeah.
Several of these do feel like traditional D&D monsters. Like the giant praying mantis and stuff like that. But what is the most? I mean, there's a lot of
Ooh,
really weird. There's a
yeah.
lot of really weird stuff there. I mean, Harley comes up with some weird stuff. I mean, I don't know where Harley gets some of his ideas from, but his were definitely kind of strange. Um, do either of you have a clear-cut favorite monster yet? Do you want to tease what one of your favorite monsters that you designed is, Rick? I know
I
I have one.
yeah, I might speak about it a little more on Thursday, but
Give
there's
us
a
a tease. Give
all
us a
right, there's
tease.
there's a creature called the Emerald Wanderer, and if you've been looking at the various graphic advertisements for this Kickstarter project, you've probably already seen him.
He's
And
prominently displayed at the
yeah,
top of the Kickstarter.
so I'll I'll leave it at that. But yeah, he's a favorite. He came out pretty cool. I think I'm already looking forward to using him in my own games. Aside from play testing, actually real life, putting him on the players when they're ready. When they're at the level to face him. That'll be fun. So yeah, that's a personal favorite. I think is the Emerald Wanderer for myself.
Cool. So one of my
Yeah.
favorites, and I didn't design it. So we have a bunch of gnomish clockwork constructs. This is probably why we have 51 constructs in the book. There's several of them are gnomish clockworks. And so we had a bunch of those, and we had the editor, one of our editors was quite frankly inspired by them and reached out to me and said, "Hey, can I create one of these clockworks too?"
Mm.
He's like, "I got a really cool idea." And I'm like, "Yeah, sure. What do you got?" And then he pitched me, and this is just a brilliant design, a clockwork cube. So imagine a gelatinous
Mm.
cube, but it's made of gears and metal. But its array is open though. It's open so you can kind of see through it and everything. And it's 10 foot by 10 foot. It is literally a Roomba, basically, a gnomish clockwork Roomba. And it's amazing. So if you recall, the gig about the gelatinous cube is you can't see it until you blunder into it.
Hmm.
Well, you can see this thing, a country mile away. So we gave it like grabbers and stuff like that, so that when you get next to it, it actually grabs
Of
you and
course.
pulls you into the actual array, and then
Nice.
you get ground up by the gears and everything. Oh, chef's kiss. I used it in a playtest to excellent effect.
Nice.
to a particularly cocky lizard folk fighter who just strode up to it with his hammer and was getting ready to introduce the business end of his hammer to it. And let's just say the barbarian had to pull his scaly hide literally out of the clockwork cube before he became a suitcase. So that is definitely one of my favorite. Tim has an amazing question here. Are the 5e people going to be weirded out by these monsters compared to other 5e monster books?
Hmm.
And follow-up question, are the DCC people going to think that they're way too vanilla? So I'm going to answer that is no and no. And it's for
Yeah,
the very
yeah,
simple reason is
I agree.
we had 5e designers create these 5e monsters, and then we had DCC designers, quote unquote, DCify them. So, and a lot of these monsters have magic items and spells and lore. And so, there's a few monsters when you set them next to each other, you kind of might not recognize them because they're a fair amount different. So, so again, is everybody going to be happy? No, but I think with having two distinct teams working on this and
Mhm.
coming from that point of view,
Yeah.
we think that that folks are gonna be pretty happy, and we hope that you guys trust us that you're gonna be happy, and hopefully feel that we've not let you down in the past. From what I hear, Crypt of the Devil, our first kind of dual project that was both 5e and DCC. I've heard a lot of folks on both sides of the fence saying that we nailed it. So we've done a few of these. Dark Tower, we've done both DCC and 5e. We're working on Caverns of Thracia right now, both versions. So I'm hoping that we nailed on this. Fingers crossed. So yes. Let's see. Looking at any other questions, that is a great question. DCC ones are
Yeah.
wild, yeah. And also don't forget those tables and charts at the back of the DCC version and on your screen is going to make the monsters even weirder.
Mhm.
So that's going to be really really a little cherry on the top as well. So, um, any last words, Rick, before I give a few announcements and then we sign off?
No, I'm just glad everybody could join us. And if you haven't backed already, folks, by all means back because it's a terrific book.
Yes, I would say that too. We are up to 3,425 backers.
Ooh.
We are 26 backers away
Wow.
from our most backed project of all time Goodman games. And we still have 2 weeks to go, which is
Sweet.
amazing. So loving that. So, all right, a couple of quick announcements. Stay tuned right after the show. There's an
Mhm.
episode of Maw of Mike, and I'm going to be a special guest. So you get to see me and hear me talk about monsters even more if you want. And then also, we have our Monster Mash show. Don't forget about that on Thursday night. We have 20 sides to every story on Friday night doing the live playthrough. And then join Rick and myself for our regular time slot at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Sunday night for another episode of Talking TSR. And guess what we're going to talk about, Rick?
One guess, folks.
We're going to
It's
talk about monsters, but a
yeah,
little different perspective. We are going to talk about some of our monster inspirations
yeah.
and some of the classic monster movies that have inspired us over
I'm
the years.
really looking forward to that show, I have to
Yeah.
say.
So
It's going to be a lot of fun.
yeah, it's gonna be a lot of fun, and I think you're gonna, if you go back and rewatch that show after you get the book in your hands, you're gonna look at
Mhm.
things and you'll be like, "Yup,
Yeah.
I know where that
Yeah.
came from. I know where that came from. I know where that came from," and we're gonna talk about that on Sunday
Oh,
night.
yeah.
So thank you everybody. It's a
Thanks,
pleasure
folks.
as always, and everybody be well and have a great night.
Good night.